Right, welcome to this very important briefing workshop. What is it?
Workshop.
It's a workshop. Housing assessment. We've got Councillor Randall and Compton on Zoom. Natalie from Urban Advisory, our consultants, also on Zoom. Hetty, is it? Yeah? Hands up. Good. Back of the class. Or front of the class. Welcome. Yours. Natasha, can I, before that, ask this question? What are you expecting from this workshop, and where does it sit in terms of the work that's unfolding?
Yeah, I can cover that off.
Yep.
Yeah. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So this is being run as a workshop, and we've got members of community boards here as well as some of our iwi partners, which is fantastic. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your days to be here. Last time we were here talking about housing was introducing our the early work we'd been starting on a housing strategy. One of the key things that we know as part of that is the importance of getting information on what our community housing needs are. And Steve will shortly take you through some of the work that we've been doing to build this picture. But this workshop is also a key mechanism for us to gather a bit more information in terms of what you're hearing from your community about their housing needs. So this slide here is just a bit of a refresh in terms of what we introduced in relation to the draft housing strategy. These were the 5 objectives there that we talked through. You see the 5th one on the left-hand side, the Māori housing one, is still to be fleshed out with our iwi partners, as well as testing the other components that we talked to you about with them as well. Now, underpinning this, there will be a range of actions. We've got some ideas about what this looks like, but we also want to make sure that those actions are really well informed by the housing needs assessment work as well. So I'll hand over now to Steve, who is going to run the rest of the workshop, and he's going to take you through, firstly, a little bit of an overview of what the needs assessment is and what the different components are, how this fits in with it.
Kia ora. So, yeah, we've got about an hour and a half with you today, and most of the time we actually want to spend with a conversation with you about what you're hearing and seeing in the community. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of where we've got to so far. Then we'll go into the questions, and then if you've got questions, we would ask that you keep those till the end of the session, when we should have some spare time. So this has been a journey that we've been on for probably about 18 months. We originally went to the government agencies, and they talked to us, or we talked to them, about what their plans were for Kāpiti, and at that stage they told us that there were higher priorities elsewhere in the country, and that we needed to show them what the need in Kāpiti was. So that was the start of this conversation about truly understanding what not just what the housing need is, but what the social needs are in this community. There's 2 components to it. So one component is gathering data. So that piece of work's already underway and is nearly completed. But almost the more important bit is the conversations that we're going to be having across the community until the end of this year, and that's why we're talking to you today. We're the first council to take this piece of work to this level. So other councils have done it, but they haven't done it as extensively as we're doing it here. And the good news is that we've now got Kāinga Ora, a Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, now saying they are actively interested in Kāpiti as a district, and they are working with us on this piece of work. And a key bit of this was having iwi involved right from the very beginning of this work. So we've been talking to them for the last 18 months, and each iwi is leading their own needs assessment process in their own rohi, and then that information will be part of the final report. I looked at Trade Me yesterday. So for the whole of Kāpiti region yesterday, there were 20 rental properties available in the district. The cheapest one was $400, and that was a 2-bedroom property in Otaki. There were 213 properties for sale. And the cheapest one of those was a 2-bed in Raumati South, which was $620,000 and was pretty run down. So that gives you an idea of the level of housing availability in this district. The conversation we're having with the community is not just around housing, like I said, so it's a holistic Te Whare Tapawhā approach. So it's the right housing in the right place with the right access to service. services, support and transport. The final report will be completed early next year, and that report is a shared report with iwi and other people within Kāpiti to inform how we move forward with housing provision across the district. I want to that. Next page. How do we do that? Yep. Oh, hang on. I'm just going to. Cool. So you've got a copy of the little card in front of you. How many of you have completed the survey so far? Cool. So the survey is anonymous. It takes about 15 minutes to complete, and we're asking people to complete it. Sorry.
Your shout.
So we're asking people to complete this, whether they're happy or unhappy with their housing, but it also gives people an opportunity to talk about what they would like to see Kāpiti looking like in the future. So we would encourage you to complete this yourself, and then through your own networks promote it as much as possible. The survey closes on the 10th of December, so we've still got 2 or 3 weeks to get those surveys in. And for council, we will be delivering paper copies of the survey to all of our tenants that live in our council housing. There's also a business survey that's going out through our economic development team, so that's asking business owners about how housing is impacting on their businesses. So are their staff able to get housing, and can they retain it when they've got it, and can they actually attract staff, or is housing an issue in that space? So that's just to acknowledge that the housing situation in Kāpiti is impacting on everybody. It's not just people that are struggling at the lower end of the scale. So this is just where we're at so far with the housing survey. So we've got a good spread across the district. We've got a good spread across age. The one thing that we're a bit low on at the moment is young people, but we're meeting the Youth Council this week. We met a group of 18 to 24-year-olds last week. We're meeting with Zeal on Thursday. We'll be having a conversation with Kāpiti Youth Service. Ask Sophie to do what she can to sort of promote things through her connections. And we've also got a couple of conversations with Rangatai in Altaki. And there's a big media push sort of now. So from the beginning of this week, there'll be more in the media. We've done some videos with local people to promote the survey as well. And that includes a lady called Donna Bridgman, who you may be aware of, who was living in Altaki and was made homeless and is now living in emergency accommodation. So we want this to have a broad appeal. So again, the more that you can push that across your connections, the better. So for the rest of the year, I'm going to be busy talking to all of these organisations. So about 45 different conversations across the community. And what we're doing with these organisations is also asking them to have their own conversations with the people that they're working with. COVID is obviously making this a bit more difficult because we have sort of a range of restrictions that we're having to work under. But we have found a way to actually run those safely, so smaller sessions where people are wearing masks. So I met with Tina last week, so Tina's going to be doing something with the Paikakariki community through the Paikakariki Housing Trust. And what I'll do, along with the Urban Advisory, is provide sort of the support and the information that those groups need to actually have those conversations. And we're hoping that there will be sort of youth to youth, older person to older person, because you'll get a different conversation happening when people are talking to like-minded people. Couple of comments from what's happened so far. So met with a group of young people last week, and they were obviously saying how difficult it is for them to get into housing. Many of them are working, but the only way that they can actually rent is by coming together. The rents are still high. Most of them want to buy their own home, but they can't really see how that's going to be possible for them. Even if they're paying $800 a week rent as a group, if they go to the bank, they can't get the bank to lend because they don't have the deposit to put it down. Or the bank's saying it's too expensive, and then they're saying, well, we're paying $800 a week in rent. It doesn't make any sense. So again, part of this conversation today is to think differently about how we might actually provide housing going forward. So we've got a model here in New Zealand already, actually how can we think differently about how we can provide housing for all sorts of people? How can we maybe have some mixed communities for people to live together? What does it mean around Papakāinga housing? So we'll ask you to think sort of inspirationally, visionary around what we could achieve here in the community. Also talked to Otaki Police a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that their officers are struggling to live in the community on the wages that they have got. The advantage Otaki Police have is that the police provide housing in Otaki, but they're not sure that they're going to be able to continue doing that. So what does that mean? I met with Andy Fraser from Otaki College yesterday, and again a whole range of conversations around Otaki and the long, strong sort of Māori heritage there, and how can we intentionally do something to try and protect the communities that live there, because we're seeing more and more people move up the coast, which is pushing the prices up. That's really quick. You know, obviously I could talk for a long time about this. Happy to talk to you any time outside of this meeting. I think Rob just wants to say a few words, and then what we'll do is we'll get into the questions. The questions are a conversation, so we really want you to contribute to that. We will be recording it. And then we'll share the output of today with you when we close. Over to Rob.
Thanks, Steve. It's really good to have you in front of Council again. I'd just say to my fellow councillors, it's really important that we all play a role here getting this information out to the community. As Steve has said, and as you've heard before, this work has been going on for some time, and if it's completed really, really well, it does give us a much better opportunity to get investment in our community and increase some of the capital into social housing where we have a real deficit. But there are so many issues within this housing conundrum that will come out from this workshop. And again, great that you're here, but also please make sure you're sharing this information into your communities. And as I emailed you the other day, one of the responses that I'd had is that people are scared that they will provide information that will get them in trouble. You've heard that it's confidential. You might need to reinforce it. It has nothing to do with enforcement. Back to you, Steve. Thanks.
So just to confirm that the survey is anonymous, so we're not asking for anybody's name, address, contact details, anything like that. So, and it will be, the Urban Advisory will be helping with us about how we actually analyse all of the information that comes in from that survey. Okay, so sorry.
So if I could just provide a comment or a question back to Councillor McCann. And this is by no means at all critical. I think the work that you guys are doing is fantastic, and Councillor, the work that I've seen you do around the housing stuff is just phenomenal. What I have seen happen is when stuff is posted in terms of pushing it, promoting it, which I will do, is that we immediately get slammed around what we need is houses, not surveys, not this, not that. So the point that I'm making is having some tools for elected members to be able to respond to that stuff, because it looks like we're incompetent, which I know we're not, and it's just simply being able to have those phrases to respond. This is why we're doing this. Yes, we are aware of the, of some of the need, and so forth. But I'll share it through my socials, and I've already seen when Councillor McCann is, those are some of the comments that comes back to him, and he does his best with his knowledge, but not all of us will have those answers. So.
I think it's a really valid point that we probably need to provide just some extra tools to our councillors. It is a really difficult situation because the answer is complex, and we all know that doesn't work on social media. People just want 3 houses built now rather than the gateway or anything else that we're doing. But we can provide, and I think we should provide some of the answers that we've been using. But there is a really good narrative here that it is about trying to make sure that there is, part of this is about investment into our community from government and other agencies, and that hasn't occurred, and that helps us step outside that particular argument. Steve may have some more to add, but I think it's a good point. Thanks, James.
So just a quick comment. We had a meeting yesterday with Kāinga Ora, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Te Puni Kōkiri, Greater Wellington Regional Growth Framework, and our 3 iwi. So Kirsten was at that meeting, and there was a strong message for me about the need for action now. Yes, we need to work towards obviously longer term strategic approaches to housing, but there was a strong message we need action now. So there definitely is a push around that. What can we achieve in the shorter term?
Steve, are you already seeing difference in data registered between the survey that you've already done and the data, for instance, MSD's housing register, housing needs register? Are you starting to see that, or you haven't looked at it yet?
We haven't looked at it yet, so we need the survey to close, and then we'll be analysing the information. But what I can tell you is there's around about 190 people on the public housing waiting list at the moment. That's nowhere near reflective of the actual need, which is exactly why we're doing the needs assessment.
Councillor Pravanov.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think it's great to have this workshop today, but I'm just sort of following up on what James was saying. That, I suppose I'd hoped before we get into the workshop that we actually had some numbers around showing what the actual issues are. And I think that would be really useful too for when we are actually going out there and talking to, people who might, have some pushback on it as well. So I think, I certainly understand that there is a real housing crisis, but it needs to be backed up with the numbers. And I hear what you're saying in terms of doing the survey, but there's one thing between doing a survey and having the ministerial agency information behind that.
So
I can just add something briefly, if I may. Council has done a quantitative component of the needs assessment, and what we can actually do is package up the key facts from that into a kind of one-page infographic that can go out with the information pack that Steve was talking to before to kind of support these conversations.
So
Thank you.
this is a big, complicated subject. There's a lot of information. We could probably spend all day just talking about housing, but today is really an opportunity to hear from you directly around what you're hearing and seeing in the community. And over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks, there'll be more and more information that will be provided. What I can tell you is 56,000 people living in Kāpiti, 190 people-ish on the public housing waiting list, which basically means you've got to have multiple complex needs to get onto the public housing waiting list. There's around about 250 Kāinga Ora houses for the whole population. We've got about 160 people living in boarding houses, Mary's Guest House and the Lighthouse. We've got around about 50 adults and around about 40 children living in emergency accommodation. So there is a real need here, but the need is not just at the bottom. What we're hearing and seeing is more working people are really struggling, and that if you live here or have lived here for a number of years and you're renting, prices are going up and local people are finding it more and more difficult to stay here. And that's partly to do with COVID. It's to do with the lack of appropriate affordable housing, but it's also to do with people from Wellington moving up the coast with Wellington wages that can afford to pay those sorts of prices. But we will come back to you that this is the start of a really in-depth examination, and we've got these questions to go through now. So there's about 5 questions, and then we can ask. We'll have this some time at the end for any more questions. I don't know whether Natasha wants to say anything else.
So if I can just say, so that those numbers are pretty awful, and I suppose that's the sort of stuff that I think we need to be aware of. We are aware that the numbers are bad, but we don't actually understand exactly what they are. Which and I know it's moving, but that's the sort of thing that I think would be very useful. Thank you.
When we get at previous discussions or WHOIs that we've had, that MSD's figures are tip of the iceberg, and then anecdotally we have something like 300. That was the last sort of anecdotal. By now you've got other you can do.
So when we did the property group did a report for council probably about 18 months ago. At that time they said that around about 300 is what they thought was needed to actually provide social housing, just social housing. It's going to be considerably more than that now.
Just a couple of other statistics, just as further background in response to Councillor Pravanov's point. So the lower quartile house prices in Kāpiti have increased 435% in the last 20 years, over the same period that the median household income has increased by 112%. In terms of the median household income needed to service a mortgage at the lower quartile house price, 58% of that median household income is needed to service a mortgage, and that's up from 33% in 2001. That's worse than both Horowhenua and Porirua. The percentage of renters that are unable to affordably purchase a house has increased to 95% across the district. And at the lower quartile house price of $696,000, which may be a bit out of date now, 88% of renters are unable to affordably purchase.
So that would be good.
Yep, absolutely. So that's the sort of stuff that Natalie mentioned that we can pull together into a bit of a fact sheet.
Mr. Mayor, before we hand on and get through to these questions, I think it's really vital that councillors do understand that there's a quantitative and qualitative part to all of this process, and Jocelyn's raising some really good questions, and the quantitative stuff has been happening in the background. What we have made a conscious decision to, if I'm still correct, is that we want to package this all together. We don't want to fly bits of it out at one point or another. The other thing is you do not want to be leading off this particular conversation in the community, just pointing out how bad it is, because then it alters the information that we're getting. So it's really important for councillors to have the information to back stuff out, but perhaps not lead, because then we undermine what we're trying to achieve.
Kathy.
Thank you. Might not be the right time to ask this question, but you said you were talking to Kāinga. Now, have they got plans to build houses in Kāpiti at the moment? And if so, how many? And also, their policy has been in the past that when they build Kāinga housing, that the people on the list in most need get those houses, be they out of the district. So has their policy changed? Because we're talking about housing people in Kāpiti. So if they build Kāinga houses in Kāpiti, are Kāpiti people going to get those houses?
So I think that's probably a question that we can come back to you and provide you a little bit more information about that. But so that's probably the best approach for that question.
Right.
Okay, so the first question is, what are you hearing and seeing most about housing needs in our Kāpiti communities? So we do want this to be a conversation, so I think Mr Mayor will sort of, if you want to say something, if you can put your hand up, and then we'll pass over to you.
Angela.
Excuse me. From a personal perspective, I've had a number of friends upwards of 60 that are renting and will never be able to get a mortgage, and they are now preparing to pay. One of them was looking at about $1,200 a week in rent for the type of place that they want to live in, because they have no ambition to ever own their own home anymore, because they're at that age group where they probably couldn't physically get a mortgage. So I just couldn't believe that they would be prepared to pay that. So therefore, going forward for them, what happens when they do retire, or they will probably never be able to retire if they still are wanting to live in that kind of rental property. So I can see that there will be a massive problem going forward for affordable homes for older people. And then that's probably top end of the scale in terms of wanting to pay that kind of rent. But then another couple, same situation, a lot older than 60, still both having to work, full-time jobs plus, and they're having to, they want to have a 4-bedroom home so they can have their grandchildren come and stay with them, and they're paying $700 or $800 a week rent. So again, they'll never be able to afford to buy their own home. So yeah, again, going forward, what will happen to them? They'll never be able to get into a retirement village because those prices are going up for an independent living situation. Then they'll get into a situation where they get so old they will end up in a rest home being government subsidised. long term that's what will happen to them, which is a really sad outlook, I think.
Can I just respond to that? So what would you like to see? What do you think should be?
Oh, look, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. If somewhere along the line there is more affordable housing for older people, and in our area that's kind of our catchment, and for these two cases that would be ideal long term.
Councillor Coates.
Just before I start off, it's in some ways it would have been helpful having the questions in advance, because you know, thinking on the spot, I can think of a few things, but I know after leaving here, so I wonder whether this questions, if it's helpful, could be circulated, and then we could.
This is the special branch shock treatment.
Yeah. It's just like, oh dang, I would have got a whole lot down in advance of this. So what I could just off the top of my head, firstly, just coming from an employer's perspective, so rising rental prices and house prices just puts pressure on existing employees. So if they are given notice in their current tenancy, can often struggle to find a replacement. So that puts pressure on us as employers in terms of being able to have an active workforce. Equally, if you're recruiting and someone's looking at moving from an area, Tauranga down here or Auckland or whatever, to take on a role, and if it's a skilled role, the challenge often isn't getting the job, it's actually finding somewhere to live. And so that's a real, I mean, we experience that. I'm sure many other businesses experience it as a challenge. So both of those kind of dilemmas puts pressure both on the employees, but also on the business in terms of being able to be viable and you know, staffed, which is already under pressure in a COVID environment as well, with limited pool of people to employ from, and even less now with the no jab, no job. So the other aspect of that is the purchasing. So as you know, with staff, I mean, our team are pretty close to us. You want to see them have their own vision and their own goals. So for them now, home ownership is becoming more of a distant possibility. It's becoming more impossible sort of by the month or by the year. And that's something that's not even, like if you look, I think from memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're saying that house prices are going up something like 2% almost a month. So if you're looking at getting a wage increase or, potentially reducing your transport costs, before you were even able to get that in place, you're already outpaced by the inflation of house prices. So that's a challenge for staff to actually, I guess, have some hope of home ownership. And the other aspect that we've seen, and again, just off the top of my head, is what I'd call unhealthy living environments. And so I think of one example where I've got a staff member living in a portacom type environment. And so out of all my staff, and you could argue that there are other, I guess, attributes as to why, but that staff member would have more health-related issues than some of my other staff. And again, it could be lifestyle, but equally, I imagine that in home environment certainly wouldn't help. An interesting one, which is just a more recent experience, is with my mum. So my mum lives in a two and a half, 3-bedroom home. It's got a little a little sunroom. And the why I mention that is if mum wasn't there, that could potentially be a home for a family. And so mum lives there on her own, has just gone into hospital, had a fall last week. And I was saying to Ange, looking at if she's open to it potentially going from the care ward that she's in into a rest home, we started ringing around the rest homes. So first one had 18 on the wait list as of last week. The 2 or 3 others had closed their books due to COVID and due to staffing. So the whole no jab, no job. And so here we've got potentially someone that needs to go into a rest home or a hospital care, would free up a home, potentially would become a rental, but there's actually, almost nowhere for her to go. And that's just one example. I know that's quite specific, but I'm sure if that's our experience, there'd be a few other people trying to ring rest homes as well and can't get in.
Just very quickly, so part of the quantitative research that we've done is looking at rest homes, so it's looking at the costs of going in, and then the number of spaces and the wait list. So you will see that as we release that information.
The other interesting thing, though, Steve, that I didn't think of, and in this role I don't know, maybe I should have, because we went to one Elsdon, I think in Waikanae yesterday. What's that? Oh, Paraparumu, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, we thought it was in Waikanae. Paraparumu. When we met with the facility manager, because Mum is in Otaki, she comes under Mid-Central, and so she doesn't immediately qualify for retirement care, and so the family of whānau all live around we live in Tihoro, work in Waikanae, other family members in Paraparumu, and it's not that they won't, but it basically just said it's more challenging to get a placement for her in that one as opposed to potentially say one in Levin or to the north. And the other, again, I can think of heaps more, but builders, just talking to builders, more so than developers. I know more builders and developers, they understand the pressure in terms of the housing pressure, and they have kids and they have family members. But, you asked the question to Ange, there's just so many aspects of this in terms of the solution. Building cost is one of them. Skilled workers and employees is another aspect of that. So from their perspective, they want to build houses quicker and cheaper, but everything is against them in terms of doing that. And I could elaborate further on that, but in a nutshell, that would, in a one-liner, that the building sector do want to kind of meet the need, but there's just so many challenges and barriers in the way. And I don't know the details behind it, but you've probably seen the news of the company down in Christchurch, I think it was, it's just gone into liquidation. Reasonable sized company, just can't get supplies. Again, there might be other mitigating circumstances behind that. But I told a story there a couple of weeks ago of a local builder in Otaki that drove to Taupo to get materials. So, yeah, I might circle around and come back with more if I think of them.
Welcome, Kim. Tēnā koe. Would you like to introduce yourself? Because we know both Natalia and Kirsten.
Here. My name is Kim Tahiwi. I'm from Te Atiawa Ngāti Toa Ngāti Raukawa, and I'm the Ngahapu Otaki Secretary, and I'm coming along here to tautoko Kirsten and the kaupapa. Kia ora.
Welcome. Oh, that's right. My response to your question, Steve, is that early last year when we met the chief executive of the Wānanga, she said that the large number of the students are adult students with families who come from outside the district, and so accommodation is a problem. We're also seeing Otaki starting to develop in terms of skills-based, being encouraged, the learning hub or training hubs for electricians, plumbers, and building skills. And again, they are attracting people from outside the district. So these people, where would they find accommodation while they're studying or learning the skills? And what that does is, these are skills that are required to increase the housing stock. And the bottleneck is already happening there for them. That's an issue. And if you're looking at those skill jobs, and then you mentioned the police having the problem, there will be teachers, there will be doctors. So it just goes, the knock-on effect goes right down the whole works. So I suppose it is the housing stock that's not enough. I don't know how you measure that. How do you measure that?
So we're measuring it through the data that we're gathering, but we're also measuring it through the conversations that we're having with you and the other communities, because the data will only tell us one side of the story. We know that there's a more serious housing issue than is represented in the data at the moment, and that's why we're taking a really broad approach. So we're not just talking to people that want to move into social housing. It is a conversation about students at the Wānanga, so that's a conversation I've had with Ngahapu and others over the last sort of few months. So once we've identified what the need is, that the next conversation is actually what's the solution.
You talk about the more well-heeled financial people from Wellington moving up here to buy properties, and that increases the price of everything, including rent. There is also the question of even those people who are coming for training down here, who then compete with the locals. So there's a potential for tensions between those who are coming from outside looking for the same advantage. A small restricted market, too many competitors, and the inherent psychological feeling that you're local and therefore you should get an advantage, but it's not there because outsiders are coming in. I don't know whether I've heard anecdotal stories, but I don't know again how you measure those sort of things. Oh, yes, I mean.
As I said, it is part of gathering all of this information in, and then there needs to be some intentionality around what we provide. So I've heard lots of stories from people in Otaki about local people having to move out of Otaki. So the question is what do we do in order to create housing options for people so they can stay living in Otaki while accommodating other people as well? And again, at the end of this piece of work, those are the sorts of questions that we'll be talking to government and other people about what can we do to provide the right housing across the district.
Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, kia ora. Just want to thank you, Steve, also for having those conversations with young people in Angasahi, and Jess and I from the community board are going to kind of put together a bit of a plan for the next few days of how we can get the word out. I've just emailed it to Mr. Kane as well to send out to all students, and also the head boy and head girl at PC to send out to all of their students. But a couple of kind of anecdotal things from my perspective. We, over the last kind of few months, have had various young people alongside my brother kind of living in our sleep out at the back, and that's part of the reason for that is because these young people are slightly older young people, and they're kind of feeling that pressure after they graduate from high school to move out of home, and their parents kind of expect that from them. This is what I've been kind of hearing and seeing, but then they don't really have anywhere to go. So they are kind of staying with us, staying with other friends, couch surfing a little bit, whether that's just, these specific young people, I'm not sure, but there is that kind of anecdotal evidence of young people and generally people couch surfing if they don't have a place to go. And I think people are generally pretty happy to open their doors to provide someone with a space to sleep, but it shouldn't be the way that things are. I think also the kind of like that piece around losing hope of ever owning a home is really real. And also, like, a lot of my friends now are just kind of staying at home. Like, I'm still living at home. I think I probably will for the next 2-3 years because I just can't, as much as I'd love the independence of having my own place or renting a place with friends, I just don't think I could afford it. And I'm working, in this role on council in another part-time job, and I still just think it's completely kind of unobtainable for me, and my friends are saying the same thing. So that's slightly kind of scary. The other thing I think in that too is young people are probably settling for housing situations or arrangements which might not be the best because they're just so desperate to find a place. And so another one of my brother's friends, she was in a pretty unstable housing arrangement, got out of there, which was a good thing, but then had nowhere to go, so got into another housing arrangement, which also isn't, I don't think, the best for her kind of safety and well-being and her health. And so people are moving from like one bad option to a slightly better one, but it's still substandard. So it's like she comes around to our house and has a shower sometimes because the shower at her house in Paraparaumu Beach isn't that great. And so it's just those kinds of things where you're seeing those kind of like individual people with those stories, but that they're not the only ones experiencing that. Some conversations that I've had with friends is kind of like around the idea that it would be awesome to kind of have a way of like owning your own cheap tiny home and like all going in, six for a bit of a piece of a land, and having our own individual kind of spaces, but that might be a cheaper option. So I think more and more young people are thinking about, okay, how do we pull together a group of like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people and all pull, the resource that we might have to do something, or just, live at home for as long as we possibly can, which I think is a good option and it shouldn't be kind of frowned upon. I think in kind of that intergenerational living of papakainga and the way that the way that we see like Māori families stay together for a long time is really like, I wish that some of my friends saw that as being a cool thing, because I reckon like, I mean, I don't mind it, but I would like the independence. The other thing too that I'm hearing is young people are just like, oh, well, there aren't that many like houses that are kind of like for young people. Like they'd like kind of a smaller place, like a cheaper place, slightly more modern, like a place that, potentially like a few stories where they can kind of, they're close to various services that they need, close to the train station so that they can get into town to see their friends, and all of those different things. So yeah, that's kind of anecdotally what I'm kind of hearing and seeing. But yeah, there are some, as I said, there are some of those kind of scenarios where you're seeing the worst of the situations that people are in. Then also some of my friends are like, well, this is, this could be how we live in the future. Like, let's all go in for a bit of land and then, get tiny houses on wheels and whatever. Like, so there are kind of different conversations that I'm hearing. Yeah.
I want to go on to Tina, but we may be running out of time. So after Tina, I want to see if we want to go to the next question. But you feel free to email Tina, Steve, any other information that you want to feed into this on those questions. Tina.
Okay, thank you. I just want to talk what Sophie said, because that's what we're seeing a lot of in Paikākāriki is a lack of options for young people, and it's really hard for them to stay in their community. I also want to go back to the conversation around our elderly and older people. So I know in Paikākāriki we've got the lowest percentage of elderly people, and that's because on the coast, and that's because there just aren't the housing options for them. There's only the 4 social units, and there just aren't good quality, easy access, built with wide doorways for disability, that sort of stuff, affordable 1 and 2 bedroom places. And I imagine that's not only in Paikākāriki, I imagine that's quite across the board. So suitable housing as well as affordable housing for our elderly. In terms of picking up on social housing, we would love to see people not having to move from their community and all of their connections and their support. And the current policy, I understand, is top of the list, doesn't matter where you live. So somebody from Ōtaki might be picked up out of their community because they have a housing need and popped into Paikākāriki because there's an available unit. That policy needs to sort of include being kept in your community, because we know all sorts of impacts come from having to leave your community. And I'd like to see council sort of be talking with providers that might be able to meet that need, like Abbeyfield, which is like a not-for-profit affordable rental supported living. So it's not the same model as these expensive villages, which are just not available for people on low income at all, or people who haven't got the ability to buy in. It's a version of renting in a supported way. So a similar model without the profit and without the buy-in. And finally, homelessness is a real issue. We see it even in our little village, and you can be homeless for a really long time. You can be homeless for over a year or more if there's not an option in your community to pick you up, particularly if you're anxious about dealing with the state, which many of our homeless people may be. So supporting a strong community sector is vital. And on the coast here, we're very weak in our community housing sector, and we see a role for council for that. Thank you. And tōtoko, this is an awesome process that you're doing. I'm going to have to go because I've got another meeting, but I did want to say thank you for all the kōrero you're doing. It's an awesome process. Thank you.
Right. Angela and Martin, you can email your stuff.
Yeah.
On to the next question. Quickly, clarify that very quickly.
When you talk about when you talk about rest homes, there is a difference between a rest home and a retirement village. Retirement villages sometimes have rest homes in them, but rest home is a care facility, primarily a care facility, as opposed to independent living, which is part of a retirement village situation. You were going to investigate. I don't know, there was an answer to James's question, and it was something about retirement village, rest homes, and I was like, oh, it's not all about rest homes. Yeah.
Who's the housing affordability crisis affecting the most in the communities you serve, and do you think COVID-19 has had an impact?
Kicking it off. And one thing that I didn't mention earlier, which I think does come into this one as well, though, from an Ōtaki perspective, and I appreciate it's probably not exclusive just to Ōtaki, but being a strong Māori community, and I'm sure you've heard through from Ngā Hapa Ōtaki, is people that are second, third generation from within that community are being pushed out of that community. And I think why I've added it now is it's probably not mutually exclusive to question number one, and I imagine aspects of question number two have had an impact on that as well. And so from a COVID perspective, sorry, the question's just disappeared, but I think if it's affecting people's jobs, then that will affect their ability to be able to stay in any area, let alone the communities that they're already in. And then, who was most... Yeah, has COVID-19 had an impact? And then again, I think because of the impact from COVID-19 on the building sector, that has also added to the inflation of prices. And again, my gut feeling is, and what I've been reading out there in terms of the national commentary, is the lack of overseas travel has resulted in local investment in terms of in New Zealand Inc., which has therefore pushed up prices. And so it's just that whole snowball effect. The price of housing has just gone absolutely nuts, which then has a flow-on effect in terms of your drivers for your rental prices as well. So I think absolutely. I mean, my wife and I were just driving the other day talking about when we were our daughter's age 16, and going back to the point that Sophie was making, you could pick up a rental for $200 a week, and to add to that, all your other living costs were quite affordable as well. Food was quite affordable, power was quite affordable, but all of that stuff is not just a little bit more expensive due to inflation, it's a lot more expensive. And it's almost like wages and all of that haven't really kept up. So I think that's it from me. I definitely think COVID's had an impact in terms of the pricing aspect of it. Yeah.
Martin.
Look, I've got the seniors portfolio, so I'll just comment on that space. But I think we've got a huge problem there with regards to people that fall into that rest home category that Angela was talking about, that perhaps don't even want to go there. But we just don't have space for our elderly, fundamentally. We've got a waiting list on our current housing stock, and the harshness of that is that it's not going to be a vacancy unless someone passes. So that's potentially a long time frame in there. We've got land there, I think, that needs to be quite a high priority to be looking at getting some small fit-for-purpose accommodation for our elderly, because they're not in a situation where they can live under a bridge or couch surf or anything like that at all. They just don't have options. And I don't think we've necessarily seen that bite as much yet. I think people are starting to run out of options, and options that are out there are full to capacity. So that's an area I think and we do have our elderly housing. I'm a bit concerned that we've started a upgrading process with that housing. Perhaps we need to stop that and look at actually potentially replacing that housing with housing that's more fit for purpose, because I think there'll be a lack of a want to spend on doing just that if we've just spent 70 grand upgrading one of those things. And I think we shouldn't just go down that pathway because that's what we've agreed to do 1 or 2 years ago, because circumstances have changed dramatically since COVID.
Just very quickly, there's a whole range of ways that we can respond to these housing issues. It's not just councils issue. There'll be another question about that later. So it's really looking at what are all the opportunities and then who are the right people to come together to deliver that. Tina mentioned Abbeyfield. So we did talk to them as part of the data conversation. We've talked to a range of other community housing providers. So it's bringing that all together and then delivering the right options.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just want to perhaps pose a word of caution. So the question that's been asked there is actually about housing affordability. And I think we're actually getting very muddled up here in some of the comments that are coming forward in relation to affordability versus availability. We also sort of need to look at whether people are the affordability part of it, and it probably relates to both, but whether it's actually for rental or whether it's actually for buying. And then also too, those people who are doing that, so you've got a range of demographics that have been talked about today. So you've got people who are probably being supported with their rentals by MSD, and then you've got those people who are working but are finding that the rental or purchasing prices of these properties is going up. So I think we've actually got to be really, really careful in terms of all the comments are good, but I think they're not actually probably as clear as they could be.
So you have an opportunity to feedback after this session. So it's the unintended consequences of this housing issue, I suppose, is what we're interested in hearing. So I think for a lot of people, they assume that it's only people that are really struggling that are struggling, but the reality is it's not that. It's people that are on a lower income that maybe have lived here for a while. So that's the sort of commentary we would like to hear from you. Are there other parts of the community that you're hearing are struggling that maybe we haven't heard about?
Try not to get into debate, and I hear what you're saying, but some of them are intertwined. So, it's the whole supply and demand. So if you've got lower availability, and you're saying it's comments around availability, that will push up prices. So it's not that they're mutually exclusive. Certainly, if you flood the housing market with lots more houses, I have no doubt that will drive down rentals because there's more availability, and you haven't got landlords that are pushing prices up because they can. So I don't think they are. I think they're interrelated.
They are, but I think people have got to be aware of that at the right time. So the question too is, so there's a certain percentage of renters probably whose rent is paid by MSD. I've got no idea what percentage that is, but no doubt there are quite a group of people that relates to, like, I would imagine all the emergency accommodation people are having their rents paid for. Would that be correct?
They pay a proportion
Okay.
of it themselves. So it's similar as if you were in a Kāinga or a house, so you'd pay 25% of your income towards the rental cost.
Yeah. So I suppose in those situations, it's a case of where obviously it's expensive, but the limiting factor probably really is the availability.
It's a complicated subject. We
Yeah.
probably need to have a conversation
Yeah.
outside of this because
Yeah.
we'd need half an hour just to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because James.
I just wanted to answer the second part of that question because I had a couple of conversations on Sunday night with you first. About that.
Yeah, and it did strike me the amount of young people at that 21st wanting to come back. So that slightly older demographic than what Sophie was talking about, who are the school leavers. So they've gone, they've done a bit of flatting, and they want to move back to Kāpiti. And I'm wondering how much COVID has had an impact on that, because the lifestyle here with the kind of things that you can do as as opposed to what's possible now with COVID uncertainties, with social distancing, and having to sit at tables and bars, and the uncertainties around the traffic light system and all that stuff. I'm wondering if that's made it more attractive. But they were all commenting that it's really hard because they're up against families trying to get a place, and if you're a landlord and you've got a choice between a family wanting to move into your house and a group of young people, that's tough for those young people to try and get themselves into that accommodation. So I think that's kind of a real concern, is that we don't have the variety of accommodation, so that young people are kind of going into places that are potentially, less backyards and I don't know, whatever. And, it's that kind of variety that's missing. It's everybody is competing for the same house.
That is exactly what came out from the conversation with the young people last week. So people coming back, but coming back to be with parents. So living and renting, and finally they've got $10 a week left after they paid all of their rent. And then they're eating rubbish food, and then that's impacting on their well-being. So they're going back home.
Yep. Look, I just really talked to my situation, to be honest. We've downsized out of a larger home to a smaller home, but we had trouble finding a smaller home. There just doesn't seem to be the stock out there for a smaller space. We thought we had some land lined up, and unfortunately that fell through due to the revaluations that came through last year. I don't think that's helped with regards to government QV following the market for land values, rather than perhaps government standing alone in that space with regards to land values, because there's not going to be much that it can come back to. And being out of that housing market, if you like, and that gap between selling and buying, the market's moving so fast that you can very easily be priced out, which we fundamentally thought we were. And fortunately, we, in pure coincidence, were able to secure a private sale for a piece of land, but paid well for it. And then there's the next stage is what you put on it, and the ability to perhaps put some cheaper options on there, whether it be relocatables, smaller houses, or something along that line, that being able to be enabled as a process, because a lot of budget is now going on land, which is not leaving a heck of a lot left over. And my income was pretty much from here. It's not high. So, and the age I'm at, there's only a certain stretch that you can do now with a mortgage at the bank. So all those factors are weighing in as well.
So I'm aware that we don't have that long, so I'll try to not sort of talk too long. There's a lot that we can say about what's happening for us in Otaki. I might just I'm going to tell you about my niece, because I think it illustrates a few of the points and connects. So she lived in Upper Hutt and was renting a house. She has 2 young children on benefit. She had to leave because the owner decided to sell their house when the housing market just went up over there, blew up over there. She looked for a house for 3 months, went to applied for, multiple houses, didn't even get a look in at any of them. So we found her a place in Otaki. So she moved over here. She was there for about a year, and it was a temporary sort of situation. Someone made their house available for her, so she kept looking while she was there. During COVID, she rang MSD to try and get on the housing list, and they told her, we're not taking any names at the moment. We're not adding to our list, which I was stunned to hear, because I couldn't believe that they would do that. So she had to keep looking and couldn't, same situation as Upper Hutt, applying for houses. She's like at the bottom of the list when someone is renting their house out. They preferably want 2 or more employed people, and someone on the benefit with 2 young children is not your dream tenant for most people. So she didn't get a place and has moved in with her sister in a house in Otaki. I'm told that she she's technically homeless. She's living in a bedroom. We've offered her a room at our place, a couple of rooms, but she wants to be really independent and doesn't want to be, living with the auntie or the cousin. So she's staying with her sister at the moment. But it's having this sort of real serious impact on her well-being, on her confidence level, on her belief that she can get a job. She was studying at Vic doing a Bachelor of Commerce accountancy, and she's actually really intelligent and could do that, but all of these things sort of compound and make it difficult for her to study. So she's just put that on the back burner at the moment, and is just looking for part-time work to sort of just add to her benefit. Our sense of it is that the COVID had an impact on it, because just the way the housing market adjusted when COVID happened, it felt like we were getting a whole lot more people coming to Otaki and buying, and then a number of rentals just sort of disappeared. Don't know what happened to them. We think some people sold, but as you're aware, there's similar things happening across the coast. And then, of course, there's a range of things happening in Otaki, which you've heard about from James and others. It looks, some of the things that we're noticing is there's some whānau that are fine. They've owned property for a while, and the parents help their children to buy houses, and they're sort of okay. Things are getting harder and harder, though. There's other whānau that have not owned a house, may never have owned a house, or haven't owned a house for a long time, and it's sort of, you can see it goes through the generations, where if the parents were renting, the children find it difficult to be able to purchase, and then their children have found it difficult to purchase. From time to time, you'll see a change where some are able to purchase, but it's a real range. So it goes from one to the other extreme, and then people are affected in between. The business, the Foursquare owner in Otaki, has sold the business, and they were asking my partner the other day, oh, do you know of a house to rent? The guy that's just bought it has bought the business, but can't find somewhere to live in Otaki. So that's that's an indicator of some of the implications for the business owners. And yeah, it's the same. You've mentioned the wānanga, it is the same. We get this real range of students. Some of them come in and buy a house straight away because they can. Others come in and stay at the pub because there's a room there for rent. And then others aren't able to find a house, and we suspect we lose a number of students because of that, because they can't come. So that's a bit more difficult to measure, how the impact on the business there, because people aren't able to move. And yeah, James has already let you know that, yeah, and I'm sure I've told you a couple of times, a number of people are being evicted and they're unable to rent, either because they can't get a place or the price is prohibitive, and so they're moving north they're being placed in emergency housing, sometimes in live-in, and we've heard as far as Palmerston. So they are separated from their support community and not able to live close to the marae. So that's a real problem for us, because that's a priority, that our people are able to stay close to the marae. And yeah, we really want to see everyone living in healthy, mana enhancing communities. We had a good hui yesterday. It's a real opportunity for us, this current situation, to rethink how we live. I'm supporting where Sophie was going, that the 2-parent, 3-children household is really quite a new thing for Māori. It's not how we've lived for hundreds and thousands of years, and for many cultures around the world. So the papakainga is a natural solution for us. It just is going to take a long time for many of us to get our papakainga stood up. So we are looking at faster solutions, which requires land, infrastructure, and the ranges of housing solutions. But we're excited by the meeting we had yesterday. It really talked about the difficulty of working with all the different agencies and trying to find solutions, and us needing to get fast, creative solutions. So that's where we're at. We're moving into that space, and actually quite excited about trying to find those solutions. And so, yeah, just want to acknowledge Steve and this council for the support that they're giving us to do that. We've started our needs assessment. Just one thing I'd like to share with you about that is that, I'll go back to my niece. She's not likely to fill in a survey, even though I'm going, hey, come and fill this in. Like getting there, giving her a tablet in front of her. She's just not likely to do it. She might start, and then I can see her getting discouraged part way through because she just doesn't want to answer some of those questions. We suspect there'll be a few people like that in our community, and so we are needing to be quite creative with our needs assessment and looking at a number of people going around talking to the different whānau in the hope that they'll be more likely to respond to that information. Thank you.
Firstly, I just want to acknowledge all the great work that you're doing. The survey's not the be-all and end-all. So if you're capturing information like that, you can send it to us in any format you want to, even if it's just you sending me an email with, this is what I've heard from within my family.
James, I know, and Jocelyn, you put your name up. Can we come back to you all after the next questions are finished? Steve, your next question.
So I'm looking at the time that we've got left, and we've got 3 questions. So I'm wondering whether we actually skip the next one, because maybe not. Let's just see whether we can get through it. So this is, what do you think needs to be done to change the housing system that we currently have? So maybe we can spend 5 minutes on each one, but then feed back more information. And again, think creatively. Don't think about what we've got now. Think about something. How do we actually get the provision we need?
Yes. Look, I'm struggling. Nothing against you, Steve. Like, I'm looking at what we've got next, which is conflicts of interest around. And this is such an important topic that it needs the time that it needs to get through to provide the information to Steve. We can email, but I'm really struggling with, and a few of us have got views and maybe we talk too much, but that we are getting told that we're running out of time. Like, I would sit here all day on this if we need to.
Well, that's precisely it. I mean, you schedule meetings, the staff have got to run things. It depends whether the staff are willing to be flexible on that, or the other ones is also important.
Yeah, I think we need to be mindful of our questions, but equally we need to allocate enough time for such an important topic.
While there's silence, Mr. Mayor, I think one of the ways we could move on faster is by not questioning the questions, but actually providing the answers that the questions are asking, because we're not here in a governance capacity, we're here to take part in the workshop.
Right.
So the question was, what do you think needs to be done to change the housing system we currently have?
Kia ora. Just quickly, 2 seconds on the last question. Yes, it is affecting people, low-income earners. They not only have no control over their housing options, but they have no control over where they go now. So they've just got no control over anything. And now it's coming up to medium-income earners and young families, and even families, older families. So it is affecting everyone. COVID is pushing everyone home. Everyone wants to come home. In terms of what we can do about it, I think if we look at the whole, when we decided to develop a piece of land, we thought about, we looked overseas and we looked at communal living kind of scenarios, and we've gone into the elderly housing. When we're going through our plan, by right, if we had just a piece of land, freehold titles, we could put 20 houses in there. If we're doing a community-based independent living kind of structure, we can get up to 60 potentially. So that's the difference between the different ways of living. Historically, Kiwis have always been, I want a piece of land, I want to own it, and I had my little piece. I think we're running out of land. I think we need to start thinking communally. That little example with the elderly housing shows you that there's a more creative way to get more houses that don't have to be 4 stories high, but we do have to pull our expectations back a bit. We've got younger people that are quite happy to put a shack on a piece of land and live in it, you know, and they can live like that communally. Māoris have lived like that their whole lives. Just quickly, I've got a brother, he's got 5 kids, one's in Oz. One's he managed to buy a rental, his daughter lives in there. It used to be his daughter and his son with his partner and his baby and her 2 kids. So I gave up my house when I lived with Dad, gave my nephew my house. So we do house swaps, okay? But we make do, people make do. But I think we need to move away from leasehold title is going to be, in my head, the thing of the future. Because the land, the value is in the land. When we do a development, the house price is 300,000 to 400,000, but the value is in that land. I could develop a section and sell the sections and make probably just as much profit, or about, you know, a bit more if I just sold the sections. The value is in the land, so if we take the value of the land out, maybe that can create, but it does mean a shift in mindset that we've held for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's the challenge. And I don't even think short term flooding the market with houses is really going to affect the house price. That's a long term it will slow it down. It'll make the houses harder to sell, so they'll be sitting on the market for longer. But I don't think if you put 200 houses in Otaki right now, that house prices are going to go, they're not. Okay, the market is what it is. It's driven by people who have big money, who can do big developments and sell them at top dollar. And as a developer, unless I was going to go, this is for charity, I too would be selling for top dollar because I too have a family to feed. Okay, unless you're going to get some really nice people who are going to give their land away, and there are these kinds of people. We've got a couple in Otaki. That's not going to really affect. Flooding the market is not going to make a huge difference. In terms of Māori, we have a lot of land. But in those land blocks, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of owners. So you'll get a land block and they'll go, what are you doing with that land? The problem is we can't get together. The way it's been set up and the way Māori land was traditionally set up, it was set up to keep it, and I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of why that was set up that way or what I feel about that, because I don't like it. But the result is there's a huge block of land that no one can build on, no one can work with, because the way the system runs, we have to get agreement from all these people to be able to provide 200 houses for 2,000 people. Okay? Building on Māori land is not the answer. It's a combination of things. And just like to acknowledge the council, like Kirsten did, this is the first time in years that I have seen the collaboration between councils, Crown agencies, community boards, iwi, everyone come together, and that tells you something. That tells you that it's not a Māori issue, it's not a low-income earner issue, it's a Kiwi issue. We all are feeling it. We all feel that there's no houses. When I was, a while ago, in my 20s, renting was a stepping stone to ownership, because renting was half the price of owning a house. I went to look for a rental the other day because, I had enough living with father. And I thought, oh my God, I might as well buy a house. I might as well buy a house, because the prices of a mortgage, structured correctly, and I'm lucky I know how that works, was cheaper than a rental. Now that's ridiculous. Now, the rentals are still high, but the house prices have gone up again. So now they're about at par. So to me, we need to change the mindset of how we live. And for us, we need to live with each other and with the land, not on it. Okay, that's our whole big thing, is what we hear from our people. We need to learn to live with the land and with each other. And it's going to be, and that whole, personally, living with my sisters around me, that's probably not my best option. But that whole communal living, it brings more to it than just a house. We looked at some model overseas where they had kaumatua, they had people working, young families, and they had young people, and they'd live as a village, they'd live as a community. So if one went out, you'd had people that would babysit the things, and so maybe that's the way we need to go forward. Because if we just keep carving up chunks for all of ourselves, we are going to run out of room. Short of shutting our borders and not letting anyone else in, we are going to run out of room. And we're going to look like a whole island of concrete jungles. And that's not going to be good for anyone. Kia ora.
Councillor Bravanov.
Thank you. So I've never really thought about this before, but in relation to some of the housing constraints in Otaki, so I think the university, I think it's probably just about the only one that doesn't actually have any accommodation for its students. Have there been conversations about setting those up so that obviously it means building them, but there's an income stream, but it keeps those other houses in Otaki free for for people to rent or buy?
Short answer, yes. Yes, so those conversations happen all the time. And so you've got a mix of iwi organisations, you've got Ngā Hapuru, you've got Wānanga, you've got Otaki Trust Board, which is an art confederation, which holds the bulk of the land in Otaki. So there are always conversations between the three, but it's having the capacity and being able to put in the infrastructure to do that. And that's where we fall down. Okay, so those conversations are happening all the time. Then you bring into the mix, why are we providing for Wānanga students when we've got 2,000 of our own people who are without housing? We don't have 2,000, that's just a figure. But so we've got what gives the students of Te Wānanga priority over ahika, which is the 4 generations of people. Like I'm an 8th generation in Otaki, but there's 4 generations all living in one house. Why are we giving priority to Te Wānanga? So it's that, because it's, for want of a better word, communal land, all those communities, all those facets need to feed into it. And so that's where we get issues. That's why we can't just go, because Te Wānanga doesn't own any land. It leases land from OPTB, Otaki Poruru Trust Board. Okay, so they don't physically own anything. They're doing some constructions now. But yeah, short answer, yes, those conversations are happening.
To answer the question, yeah, I grew up on a farm with 3 generations, so for me it was just a way of life, and I think we need to, as a council, be starting to look at flexibility on new ways of doing things. I also think that there are many people in our community who do not and will never have the means to own the traditional kind of housing that we currently think of as housing. We need to start to look at new ways of doing that. We also need to mandate, I think, affordable and social housing within our green fields and be more prescriptive about that. We also need to change how we deal with our developer contributions to change the balance of our housing continuum. These are all things I've talked about before, but I think there are some big structural things that we still need to do to make a meaningful difference.
I'll just be quick. Just agree with everything that's been said very much with regards to the lack of commercial ownership of land. It needs to be more communal, or there needs to be options. We need to have options. We need to have a lot more options than what we have in the current basket. Things like hostile situations for youth. I look at the Wānanga up in Otaki, the piece of land that we've just bought could potentially, a hostel could be in there, which could be a part of the mix. We need to be looking at not necessarily all land being held in commercial interest. We need to look at those leasehold titles, whether it be through local government or an agency, where that gives the ability to access housing. The big issue here will be the lack of capital gain that's been enjoyed by generations in the past. In other words, all the capital gain that people in those sorts of situations are going to make is through the paying off of their loan. That's going to be about it as such. That's going to be the trade-off around getting a head over your head, and that'll be something that moving forward, people just have to get their head around. You're not going to make a big profit necessarily out of that style of housing, but you're going to get a head over your head, and you could be mortgage-free relatively quickly. I think there needs to be a systemic change, and the only way you're going to achieve that is through education, and that was a long-term thing. I also think there needs to be more empowering and cohesion in the consenting process. Rather than it's been described to me as nitpicking in those environments. We need to be able to empower people in that space and not be giving so much of the runaround that I'm hearing that goes on in there. I know that sounds brutal, but I think we're past the time of dressing these things up as such. And or we need to revamp that whole system so that it is more cohesive and works in a way that's a lot more user-friendly than it currently is.
Just want to touch on the kōrero from Kirsten. So banks lending, you've got whānau that want to help whānau. They want to either put little units on their property, or they want to help family members into their own properties, and the current lending conditions don't allow for that. So I'll just try and keep that really quick, but no, numerous examples of families in situations where they could potentially help other family members, but the loan-to-value ratios and all the other stuff are just too restrictive.
Yeah, so I suppose, at the growth strategy, one of those options are apartments, and I think that could go some way if they are built to actually help people who want or who need smaller apartments or smaller living areas, which are high quality. And I suppose, obviously, you've got the money side of it too, but I think sometimes quality of life and money actually balance things out. I think the other day we talked about cross-leasing, and I think maybe that is something that we could look at again in terms of not having to buy and sell land. And then I think the other option too that has been bandied around every now and again is tiny houses. And tiny houses, they can be very good quality. They can provide a really good living environment. And if quite frankly, if people are living in houses here that are not up to scratch, then that is the landlords are basically in breach of the regulations. And I understand that if you're living somewhere you've got nowhere else to go, you're not going to ping your landlord because you're going to be out in your ear even quicker. But there needs to be some way of ensuring that these places are brought up to spec.
Yeah, just really briefly want to talk about everything that Kim has said. I thought her kōrero was absolutely beautiful, and that whole, the value being in the land and thinking about this in a different way. Tiny homes, they're a creative solution, so we've got to think outside of the box and just to learn not to live on the land, but with the land and with each other. I think we should really hold that true and close as we move forward, because that's such an important kind of way of reframing the kōrero. So I just want to say that because, it's real moving. Thank you.
Right. Next question.
Just a couple of quick comments before we get on to the next question. Natasha, I and Councillor McCann visited a development in Wainuia Mata called Te Puna Wai earlier this year. So that was iwi-owned land where there was a mixed development. So it was some Kamatua housing, there was progressive home ownership, there was market housing. And that was a partnership between iwi, the Wellington Company, a community housing provider, and the Housing Foundation. So a real mix within the community, and you wouldn't actually know which was which. So we don't want to create ghettos either. So we don't want 500 Kāinga Ora houses over here, because that's what the need is. So there's a conversation about blind tenure, so you don't know exactly, it doesn't stand out. And that housing has to have the right connections to services and green space and transport and schools and employment. Again, so if we took another 500 Kāinga Ora houses and put them at Otaki Beach, that isn't going to work. So it needs to be that whole of system conversation. Okay, next question. So we've got two final questions. And you sort of started to answer this through that last commentary, so I've lost my page. Just give me a moment. What's the most important thing that you think council could do differently to support well-being and affordable housing options in our community?
So I think that there is a lot of people out there who have got land who are not developers, but would potentially, could actually help in this situation in terms of cross-leasing and tiny homes. And I suppose that is something that is, and it's the council allowing that to happen much more easily than it actually is currently occurring, and that those types of things to me could occur much more quickly than waiting for, the growth strategy and saying, well, this area can have so many apartments, because to me that's a much longer term process.
My worry is what we can do as a council is a drop in the bucket in terms of what the government can do. So my thoughts is really strong message to the government around the big levers that will make a difference and just hitting that home really hard. So I think we should do the things that, others have suggested that council can make a difference in the consenting process, potentially holding people's hands around, those that may have not developed before. And I think if Councillor Elliott was here, was allowing people to be able to put units, additional units onto their properties. But I think where the lever's going to move the most is getting a really strong message to the government around those pressures around lending, around access to just different loan schemes and stuff like that in terms of helping people and removing some of those other barriers that we've already heard of.
Yep, I agree strongly with Councillor Coots here with regards to how we interact with government. There need to be sending some strong messages there, but need to be constructive so that we don't burn bridges. Partnerships, as you mentioned, Steve, between different agencies, I think is very, very important. There's no one agency that's going to solve this problem on their own. So I think communication is very, very important. And I do think the land ownership issue is part of the mix. In other words, taking that land, if you like, out of the market in a lease type arrangement, that then it just takes the capital gain aspect out of the market. And I think for social housing or any of that sort of housing, that's what you have to do. The government's cheap housing thing that they did, where they sold it and went straight back onto the market, is absolutely pointless if you really want to tackle this, especially from a long-term perspective.
And do like the example that Steve has given us about the partnership development that happened in Wainui, and think that would be a great fast solution for Otaki. Interim.
Kia ora. Yes, I agree with Councillor Coots in that this is all in. Everyone needs to help. I don't think what council can bring to the table, at times their hands are tied, so it needs a wider market of suppliers, so it needs everyone from government to come in and deal with it. I also agree with Councillor Halliday about education. In terms of Māori, it would be great for us to be able to educate our people as to how this, because we are predominantly in that low medium income earner bracket, which they actually have no idea how to even get into this market. So to be able to educate them, for us to be able to educate them so that they can at least be on a level par when they go, okay, I want to build a house on the back of my section. At the moment, they're not even on a level par. They're not even in the playing field. They're not even thinking about it. So we have to bring them up here first to educate them as to what the options are, what they can do, and how to go about that before they can actually even get into the market. So for us, it would be beneficial for that. But I think council's doing a great job in just engaging people on the kaupapa itself. But I understand that at times, legislatively, your hands are tied. So we need a bit more pull power, if you like, from outside sources.
I just wanted to follow up on James's comments, really, that what we can do is, this kind of kōrero is fantastic and quite aspirational, but in terms of pulling those big levers, it is central government that has access to those. So it's how we best play that advocacy role, not just ourselves, but across the region and across the sector. And the last workshop we went to with the Regional Growth Leadership Group, one of the takeouts of that was this joined up approach to advocating for this issue at a region-wide basis, and I don't think we should take our eyes off that ball. And we're kind of reaching a crux point with the way we have a conversation with central government. Across the sector, it's becoming more apparent how we shout and we're not listened to. We try and be the squeaky wheel, we try and have these conversations, and I think it's at some point it's got to reach a breaking point, and central government will start listening to us, but we need to keep working at that bigger local government level. I know that's not this conversation, but I just wanted to put that in there. If we're talking about advocacy, it's much more effective if we do that at a larger kind of scale. And the second point I wanted to make, completely separately, is following up on the making it easy. Now, we keep doing better and better, but somehow we hear that it's hard to do things here. Now, whether that's true or not, whether that's that we're not communicating how we do things well, but reputationally, we still have work to do to be a district where we facilitate, not block. And I'm not saying that we are that, but that's the perception that we hear less and less, but we keep hearing it.
Well, the good news is that we are advocating strongly, and that there's a change in tone for government, and that's why we're doing this work, because it's not about going to government with a stick and saying do it. It's going with the information and saying we've got a range of levers that council can pull, and we definitely want to do that. So we're developing a housing strategy with changes to the district plan and other things, and I'm actively working with a range of groups to try and facilitate an easier conversation with council. So that definitely is happening. And Kirsten and Kim were at the meeting yesterday. There was a definite change at the meeting yesterday from those government agencies around how we're going to move forward. Just very quickly, just from what Kirsten was saying again, I met with Horatāpai about 10 days ago and talked to them, this same conversation. And they were saying that for a lot of people, they're just living in the moment. They're trying to survive. They're not even thinking about aspirations for the future. But a very strong message from them was around how do we actually give people more self-determination over their lives, so that we're not just telling them how to do it, we're actually educating them, and then they're educating their children, so that people can move and have aspirations. And I think somebody said earlier that not everybody's going to be able to get to buy their own home. That's actually okay, as long as they can live somewhere that's warm and dry and they can afford it and they've got connections. So just, again, good messages. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that's really positive. Thank you.
So this is the same question really, but it's what do you think other providers and groups need to do differently to support wellbeing and affordable housing options in the community? So other providers could be developers, community housing providers, government, health services, employers, schools.
Can I just ask, some years ago there was a very active Abbeyfield group, advocacy group. Have you touched base on the remnants of that group?
So I talked to Abbeyfield about 6 weeks ago. The group, my understanding from them is that the group is not really still active, but Abbeyfield are interested in having a conversation in Kāpiti again if there's a group that would like to pursue that conversation.
I think these might not be exactly tied in with that, but there needs to be hui created, or we need to create the space between parties so they can be in an open way, so that they can basically allow the right people to rub shoulders, if you like, people, agencies, government, developers. So it stimulates the market to find solutions as well. That, if you can create the space, sometimes, or a lot of times people will meet other people and they can just go off and do their own solutions as well. It's not necessarily something we have to do, but we could help facilitate those sorts of meetings. I think it's important to keep an eye on the local government reform. And I do note there that one of the things noted in that is how local government's going to be funded. And perhaps with Three Waters going, something like housing is something that could be central money pulled out of government in an ongoing way, with local government being more involved in that housing space. And it's a conversation we'll be having coming up, I dare say, in the not too distant future, but just wanted to potentially flag that as a pathway in that conversation as well. And I just wanted to note that I just noted the Impact Trust very recently just had a role advertised for a navigating role in this sort of space. And I think there needs to be more focus on these types of positions from that wellbeing perspective, but that holding the hand, whether it be through the consenting process or whether it be our elderly people or our young or disenfranchised, because that education process is going to be a longer term solution that gives that more immediacy to making something looking just so unattainable or hard to do as a process a lot easier.
Just in recent years, the Lotus Centre over the railway lines, they created some kind of communal living. Can you share a little bit about that? I don't know any details about it.
We can pull something together and send it out to elected members is probably the easiest way of dealing with that.
And I just see that as an example of something that's happened in real time. It's just happened recently. People are buying into it. It's still being developed, and it is potentially a new or innovative way of living.
I don't think we've heard this term, but in the housing space, there's a lot of talk about the missing middle. So you've got social housing at one end and you've got the market at the other. In New Zealand, there's not much in the missing middle. So then it's all of those sort of creative solutions, different ways people want to live, co-housing, papakaing, and whatever it is. I see council's role as being aware of what those options are and then sort of being the enabler. Obviously we want the right growth in the right place and good quality housing and all of that, but there's definitely a role that we could play either at the front or at the back of the room to try and make those things happen.
No, that was the last question, right?
That was the last question.
Can I raise something in terms of the people who are homeless and people who take them in and house them in conditions which are not acceptable according to our regulatory standards, and therefore council is put into a situation where we have to become enforcement agents. And James is smiling because 3 years ago, I think it was it 3 years ago? We had an incident in Otaki of a Catholic Church related activist who had land where he was housing a whole lot of people who were homeless, mental health issues, but the condition of the housing was not top of it. And the neighbors had complained, council was stuck in a regulatory enforcement role. And it came to really an interesting situation where to tell the chief executive, if tomorrow council enforcement people are going to move them out, the mayor will go and take the tent and put there and you'll have to move me out with them. But a solution was found. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is that council can be caught in those sort of situations given increasing problems there. So it's not going to go away. We are in it because we are regulatory authority, enforcement authority. What do you do?
So I know that it's come up a couple of times in the conversation today about the regulatory barriers, and I think it's really, really important to remember that those regulatory barriers are, the intent behind them is about providing warm, safe and dry homes for people, and that is what everybody wants. So I do think it's important that when we start talking about rolling rolling back the regulatory requirements, that we're not forgetting that really, really important point. And sometimes there are solutions that can be found to some of the tricky situations which come up. But yeah, it is absolutely, the council can end up in difficult situations when we're wanting to make sure that people are in warm, safe, dry homes. But sometimes any home is better than no home.
Look, I appreciate what you're saying, Natasha, and I'm not saying you need to cut corners, but what I'm hearing is there's also lack of interdepartment cohesion, if you like, which adds a lot more cost and a lot more time to the situations of people going down a certain pathway to be then told that, oh, sorry, I'm talking about those sorts of things. I don't think anyone wants a substandard home as such, but when there's discretionary aspect as such, there's just got to be a little bit of loosening up in that aspect compared to what other councils are doing around the place as well, potentially.
Suppose when you are pressed to provide creative solutions within the constraints that you have, then the regulations are regulations, and the bureaucracy is there to ensure those tick boxes are done. So how do we creatively bend the rules without breaking them? I don't know. So that's a critical. It's a very difficult place for council to be, given the housing crisis, which is not of our making. It's the consecutive central government's lack of delivery. Steve, you got anything?
For those of you who don't know, basically homelessness is working in and around the homelessness sector is what I've done for a long time. So I managed the soup kitchen in Tory Street for a couple of years. And the housing issue in New Zealand has been here since I've been in New Zealand, 2004. And there are solutions. Completely acknowledge what Natasha said. There are obviously regulatory frameworks that we have to work within, but there are solutions for people. So I've worked with a number of people locally recently that were in really terrible situations. And the key message from that for me is you've got to take time. You've got to take time to actually sit and talk to them and find out what their situation is, and then work with them at a speed that they can manage to get them into a better position. And unfortunately, if you've got an advocate with you, it makes a difference when you go to work and income and you're trying to get somebody on a waiting list. And that's the reality of it. So unless we change the way that we're working, which is what I think Kim and Kirsten have been saying today, you've got to think of a different way, because we all suffer in the end otherwise. So where to from here, next steps. So what we'll do is we'll share the notes from this meeting with you all after today. If there are things you want to add, feel free to do that. If you want to talk to me, feel free to talk to me. I just want to re-emphasise that we really have made a lot of progress in the last 18 months since we first started talking about this. So, Rob's made a difference. Really would encourage you all to complete that survey and just really get people to complete it. So we've got a target of 1,000. We've got about 600 now. It'd be great if we got 2,000. If you own a business, look out for that business survey, because that's another important component of it. What will happen at the end of this year, the Urban Advisory, who are helping us with this work, they will prepare a final report on the qualitative, the conversations that we've had. They're also going to produce, there'll be another report which will have all the data, which is going to be about 120 pages of quite dry stuff. But the Urban Advisory will actually draw it together into a summary document, so we've got both, so it's actually readable and easy to absorb. That report, as I said earlier, is a resource for this community to use, so it's not just a council report. iwi will have their comments, their needs assessments included in that, and then the intention is that then really leads to how we actually think about a whole range of housing options in the future. But again, that it's not just housing, it is environment, it is schools, it is employment, it is transport. Thank you all for your time today.
If I could just have on closing. Look, I know we've touched on very lightly over many different complexities within the housing challenge. I just wanted to thank everyone for sharing some of their stories, as well as other information that they have. It won't be your only opportunity to discuss this. As Steve indicated, there's this is feeding into a couple of different pieces of work that we'll be coming back to you with in the new year some point in time. So thank you.
Just to add, look, the year after year, the last few years when we asked the government crown agencies who are involved in housing, they've always said that Kāpiti doesn't feature high in the priority list. That's because the methodology used by MSD is tip of the iceberg. What this survey will do and the work to drill down is to give us the hard data for us to argue, actually you're wrong, this is the actual need, so it's evidence-based, so this is really good. Martin, have you got something to say?
Oh, look, I've completed the survey. Just one thing I would add to it is maybe there needs to be a box at the end where people can just put general comments. Would be quite helpful, especially if people are outside the norms with regards to the question. I answered all the questions the best I could, but then I had a few things I would have liked to have added separately, if you like, there as well. Just a bit of feedback on that.
James.
There is a free take box at the end of the survey. So there's a bit that says what would enable you and your family to thrive in Kāpiti. So there is a space there which you can put up to 500 comments in.
I just quickly want to acknowledge the work that both the experience and the commitment that Steve brings to the job. Every interaction I've had with you, Steve, and I guess I want to encourage you and just acknowledge has always been positive. And people that I've fed onto you, followed up with, their engagements with you have been good, and certainly got a good person in behind that. So I just want to, while you're here, say that.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much. Yeah, yes.
Thank you for that. But I don't know whether I said this earlier or not, and Kim and Kirsten brought this up yesterday. I met with James Tapuni a few months ago, so he leads Ngāti Tor's Community Housing Trust, and we're talking big numbers of need. But what he said to me was, if we get one house, that's one family that are not struggling anymore. So I am extremely passionate about this, as you can tell, but I'm not going to be happy until we've actually got some stuff being built, and then some of the stuff needs to be built quickly because we've really got people struggling. So yeah, thank you.
And then you hear.
Oh, kia ora koutou. So I think the Mayor's going to break for about 10 minutes, and then the next session is only for those of you that were interested in talking